If you're thinking about moving to Charlotte, but you like the lake life, then you're in luck. Charlotte has several beautiful lakes around, making this a great place to live, work, and play. And in today's video, we're going to dive into the computer and I'm going to pull up a map and I'm going to show you around the different lakes and tell you a little bit about each lake. And we're going to do that right now. Okay, so now let's take a look at the map. I am going to share my screen, and like I said before, we are talking about living in or moving to Charlotte with a lake feel to it. So if you like the lake life, you want to move to Charlotte, you've got plenty of options. And I want to take a look at the several different lakes that you have to choose from. First one is down here beside Charlotte is Lake Wylie, and then you go up and here is Mountain Island Lake, and then above that is Lake Norman. Now these are the three main lakes here close to Charlotte, but if you don't mind a little bit of a drive, there's several others to choose from, so let's look at those. You go on up a little bit above Lake Norman and you have Lookout Shoals Lake. That's a very small lake. You have Lake Hickory here. And then next to that is Rhodhiss Lake. And then you go on down a little ways and this is Lake James. Now this is a little bit farther away from the Charlotte area. It's about an hour and 45 minutes, I think, but maybe an hour to Asheville, which is that way. But I had to include it in this because it is a beautiful lake. It is so pretty. Then down here we have Moss Lake. And as you can see, if you want to move to the Charlotte area, but you want to move towards or close to the lake, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lakes just right here to choose from. So now let's take a look at the roads getting to them. So I'm going to change the color so you can see here. So here is 85. These are the interstates. We'll do those first. So Interstate 85 comes up through here, goes through Charlotte, and goes back up. Then Interstate 77 comes this way along beside Lake Norman. It goes all the way through Charlotte and it continues back down under Lake Wylie. Then you have Interstate 40, which is above Lake Norman, and it comes below these lakes here. So this is Interstate 40 going this direction. Now some of those are interstates. So we will look now at some state roads. So if you want to take state roads, you can. So here is 74. It goes along here, follows along 85 and goes into 74. Here is 321. I'll do that one. It is between the two lakes here and it comes down this way. Then you have 16, which is right here, and it comes down alongside of Lake Norman, and it goes straight into Charlotte. And then you have 27, which is right here, and it comes down under here. It turns into 73 right there. So 150 is right here. It's above Moss Lake, and it goes up through the country, and it goes through Lake Norman here and back out. Depending on where you live, like Lake Wylie, you can either go up here and hit 74 or 85 and go into Charlotte, which really there's a lot of different ways because you're so close to Charlotte here. This lake, Mountain Island Lake, is 16. A lot of people hit 16 and go into Charlotte. Then if you're on Lake Norman, depending on where you live, you can either take 73 and then go down to 77. You can, if you're on this end, you can do 150 to 77 or 150 to 16. There's several different areas. Now, one thing to remember on 77 here, this little section does get, well, all the way into Charlotte. That whole road gets very backed up. Sometimes traffic is really heavy, but part of this, they do have express lanes, which are toll lanes that you can take for a little fee. So, and it's faster if you take the toll lanes. but that may be an added cost if you live in the area and want to take the toll lanes. So that's something to remember. Charlotte, around in the Belmont area, 85, going around Belmont and in towards Gastonia, it gets, that traffic does get backed up right in there going to and fro. So that's something else to remember on 85. So there are the roads. That's the way you can get here. If you're over in this area, I didn't think to tell you that, you could take 40 and go to 77, but there's also 18, which takes you down to 27. So you can go that way. So that shows you the roads and the lakes. So now I'm going to clear all of that out. I am going to zoom in and we are going to start with the first lake here. We're going to look at Lake Wylie. So one thing to note about Lake Wylie is that Lake Wylie is partly in North Carolina and partly in South Carolina. So it borders North and South Carolina. The line goes right here and then it cuts back and pretty much goes right down the middle of the lake until it gets about right here. Then it cuts back up. So if you're living on Lake Wylie, you can either be in South Carolina or you can be in North Carolina, depending on where you live. Now, one thing to remember or keep in mind is that South Carolina property taxes tend to be just a little bit lower than property taxes in North Carolina. So that's a plus about living on the South Carolina side. Now, it's usually a little bit more expensive on this side of the lake, just probably because you're closer to Charlotte, except for Tega Cay, this area right here. This is an up and coming area and it is expensive living in that area. But some of this area on the South Carolina line might be a little bit cheaper. Now, let me stop right here. Let me just make a note that there are no cheap lakefront or lake properties in this area. There are none. They're all expensive. There are some that are less expensive than others, but there are no cheap ones. Sometimes you can find property that's a little bit cheaper, but you have to be careful because it's leased land. You're not buying the land. You don't own the land. You have to pay a monthly fee or a monthly lease rent, or there's something major wrong with the property, or it's not rebuildable. There's usually, if it's cheap, there's something wrong with it, or it's not real. It could be a false ad. So just be careful. There's no cheap properties. There are some that are cheaper than other. My little 2 cents there. Okay, back to Lake Wylie. Now, looking at Lake Wylie flows in from 2 different rivers. It flows in, this one is the South Fork River and this is the Catawba River. The South Fork River is a little bit smaller than the Catawba River. South Fork River, right in this area especially, it's kind of narrow and kind of shallow. So this is where it first really starts flowing in, and the properties, the water there tends to be a little bit more murky. So in this area, prices might be a little bit cheaper than other areas, just because the lake is not quite as desirable as the other areas of the lake. So keep that in mind. But now right here is Daniel Stowe Botanical Gardens. If you buy on this side, the gardens go kind of through here. So if you buy down in here on this lake right here, then this borders the garden and there will nobody be able to build over here. So it's pretty down in there. Now they are going down through here and they are building some new developments, beautiful homes, and we'll take a tour of some of those neighborhoods later, but they are building this area up and it's kind of making this area be a little bit more, prices are rising because of that, but it is pretty down through there. So one thing to keep in mind is that this little stretch of the Catawba River, some of these homes are smaller, but they are a little bit more affordable, but there is a dam right here. So if you buy something way up here, you can't get in a boat and go to this lake. You would have to get in the boat and go down. So just remember that. Now right here is the Whitewater Center. The Whitewater Center is very popular outdoorsy type area. They have whitewater rafting on the lake. They have kayaking. They have zip lines. They have a big, huge rock climbing wall in the lake. It's a really neat place to go. Lake Wylie is about 13,000 acres of surface water, and it's 325 miles of shoreline. There's 8 public marinas, several restaurants, and the homes on that house are usually over the last 6 months. I looked over the last 6 months, and the home prices ranged anywhere from $475,000 up to about $4.5 million, depending on where you're at. And that is waterfront property, so that'll give you an idea. Okay, so then we're going to go up to look at Mountain Island Lake. Mountain Island Lake is residential. Most of this is almost all of this is residential. There was one small lot that was commercial that had an old biker bar on it, and it closed down. And they are right now, I did hear recently that they are building a restaurant on that. It's going to be a huge, massive 2-story waterfront restaurant. So it will have one restaurant, but there are no marinas, no commercial properties, no restaurants other than that. There are a couple boat ramps that you can access. And one thing on this lake is the Latta preservation. We call it the Latta plantation. This is one thing I like about it. That house on the screen there, the historic site, was built in the year 1800. And you can go and you can tour this area. You can tour the lake, tour the house. They have reenactments from time to time. They have people dress up in, costumes, and they do reenactments of living back in the day. So it's neat, but they have horseback riding. I think you might have to bring your own horses. I'm not sure, but they have hiking trails. They have kayaking, they have fishing, they have all kind of stuff there. They have events all throughout the year. So there's always something going on the Latta plantation. So a lot of this, it makes the lake so pretty because there are no houses in through here because it's part of the preservation. So it's a really pretty lake. It has about 2,800 acres of surface area, and it's 61 miles of shoreline. And houses on this lake tend to be, over the last 6 months, they ranged from $450,000 up to $2.1 million. So that will give you an idea about that. Now let's move on up to Lake Norman. Lake Norman is the largest man-made lake of North Carolina. It is one of the most popular here. It is a very busy lake. There's lots of lake activity. If you're living on the Cornelius, the Davidson, the Mooresville side of it, this side of the lake tends to be more expensive. So this side of the lake tends to be more expensive because it is closer to Charlotte. Now, if you go over here to Denver, this area is growing. Everybody's wanting to move out of Charlotte and into Denver, especially if they want to live on the lake. This is the first place they think about, is living in Denver. So Denver is a very fast growing area. And if you look up above here, this is Cheryl's Ford, and Terrell is in here. This used to be some of the less expensive real estate, although they are building it up. They're building a lot of new homes, so prices are increasing in through here. But if you wanted affordability on Lake Norman, this is where you went with Cheryl's Ford. And one of the reasons is it's just a little awkward getting around the lake to go places and getting around, and it's a little bit farther from Charlotte. But they are, like I said, they're building it up, and it is it's growing. And Lake Norman has about 32,000 acres of surface area of the water. It's 520 miles of shoreline. There's 8 public ramps. There's 16 marinas, 14 restaurants. So there is lots of activity, lots of things to do on lake. It is big, but there's lots of things to do, and that's why it's one of the most popular. Houses on this lake over the last 6 months were anywhere from $500,000 up to $8 million. And there is one house currently listed on Lake Norman for $22 million. So it goes on up above $8 million, but it's a beautiful lake. Let's just move up. We're going to look at Lookout Shoals Lake. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And here is Lookout Shoals Lake. Now, Lookout Shoals Lake is a very small lake. It is 1,300 acres. It's 37 miles of shoreline, and it has 2 boat launches. There's one here and one somewhere over here. So it does have 2 public boat launches, but there are no marinas, no restaurants. And this is a little bit less expensive. It is easy commute to Statesville. There's Hickory over this way, Conover. You know, it being a small lake, you tend to be able to get property a little bit cheaper. So houses on it were selling from anywhere from $280,000 to $760,000. So if you're looking for affordability but want to be on the water, this would be your option. But there are very few houses that go on the market in this lake. Every once in a while you'll see one, but not very often. Now let's go over and look at Lake Hickory. So here is Lake Hickory. It goes right here, Lake Hickory, and it's a little more than 4,000 acres of water surface. It has 105 miles of shoreline. There's 16 boat ramps, 5 marinas and restaurants, and they just opened. I have not been to it, but right along in here somewhere they have just opened a new river walk, and I'm excited to go look at it. But I think it's like 1.2 miles, but across the river, and well, it might be on this side. I think it's on this side of the lake, but anyway, that just opened. And it's also convenient to Hickory. It's right here in Hickory, but it's also convenient to Statesville, which is that way. And then you have Charlotte down this way. So it's really convenient there. The home prices on it is about $275,000 to $1.8 million. Remember that the farther you get away from Charlotte, in general, the prices do tend to get a little bit cheaper. So that's why you're seeing them a little bit cheaper up here. You got a little bit more of a commute to the Charlotte area. And then this is Lake Rhodhiss. And Lake Rhodhiss is about 3,000 acres of water surface. It has 90 miles of shoreline. There's 6 access areas and 1 marina. Rhodhiss Lake, prices on Rhodhiss Lake range anywhere from $600,000 to $2 million. And these are lakefront properties that I'm talking about. Now let's look at Lake James. Like I said before, Lake James is a little bit farther from Charlotte, but I had to include it. It's at the foothills of North Carolina, in the foothills of North Carolina. So you can be on this lake and see mountain views all around. It's beautiful. It is one of the first lakes coming off of the mountain, so it's also one of the cleanest lakes. They all flow down from here, but it's a beautiful lake, and it has about 6,800 acres of water surface, 150 miles of shoreline. There are 5 recreational areas, several different state park areas, but there are 5 recreational areas, including 4 boat ramps. And from here, it's about an hour and a half commute to Charlotte and about an hour to Asheville. And prices on this lake is $550,000 up to around $4 million. It's not as developed yet. It's just now getting to where they're building developments in some of these little cove areas. So it's just now starting to grow. But like I said, it is a beautiful lake. Now let's look at one more lake down here. Let's look at Moss Lake. Moss Lake is, I like to refer to this as a hidden gem because it is a little bit less expensive. It's a small lake, 1,600 acres of water surface and 57 miles of shoreline. There's about 10 boat ramps, public boat ramps. There are no marinas. There are no restaurants that I know of. And it's about a 45-minute drive to Charlotte, depending on traffic. If traffic's good, you might can get there in 35 or 40 minutes. If traffic's bad, it might take you an hour. So it's a little bit of a drive, but tends to be a little bit cheaper because it is farther out from Charlotte. But prices on this lake range from about $350,000 up to about $1.6 million. So all of these lakes that I showed you today are all full recreational lakes, meaning if there's a lake activity that you enjoy, you can do it on these lakes. Fishing, boating, swimming, skiing, you name it, you can do it. If you have any questions about any of the lakes, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be glad to help you, and keep an eye on my channel because I'm going to be going back and doing some more detailed videos about some of the areas around these lakes.